Good evening. We're so happy to see you tonight on behalf of the St. Katherine Greek Orthodox Church and St. Katherine Greek Orthodox Church. Thank you, Father, for such a blessing to have you here tonight. Just real quick before we get started, I wanted to go over our housekeeping items. Please double check your cell phones and make sure they're silent. Also, this evening at 8 o'clock, we're going to have soup and salad in my office. We know we're going to start early tomorrow, but if you're hungry, please join us. Also, if you would be so inclined, we would love to have donations. Our donations are going toward future retreats so that we can invite colleagues again or another speaker. But your support will be greatly appreciated. We can also set the out for convenience. Other than that, I would welcome you again. We're happy to have everybody, and I'm going to pass out the bells. Please give us a little prayer.
Thank you. Much gratitude for organizing this retreat and receiving the local society and parish. We thank you for our efforts. May the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, you have presented us this opportunity this evening and tomorrow morning to bring our relationship, our marriages, our struggles to live a life pleasing to you before you this evening. We ask that you would teach us the truths about marriage, empower us to live lives that would be virtuous, which would build the body of Christ in our homes, the small church. Please illumine us, speak to us. Please heal our distortions, heal our infirmities, and help us to live a life that is pleasing and holy to you. We ask all this evening, and especially bless our speaker this evening, Brother Josiah. Give him the words of eternal life that pertain to Orthodox Christian marriage. We ask this in your name, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You may be seated. A warm welcome to the parish of St. Katherine Greek Orthodox Church. Generally, we have many of you that are from various parishes in the larger valley here. Some come to some this evening, perhaps and even some from Flagstaff. It's a pleasure to host you this evening. We hope that the church will be the suitable context for you to hear words, especially from the patristic wisdom of our church that Father Josiah will bring to the light during his lecture this evening. By way of introduction, Father Josiah Trenham is an Orthodox priest. As pastor of St. Andrew Orthodox Church in Riverside, California for more than 20 years. Father has taught theology and history at the university since 2003 and has a PhD in theology from the University of Durham. He has published numerous articles and 2 books, lectures widely on many theological topics, has more than 500 homilies and lectures on his podcast, The Arena on Ancient Faith, listened to by thousands around the globe, and is the founder and director of Patristic Nectar Publications. Father Josiah is married and has 10 children, so he has much wisdom to grow. Father, please come up and present. Thank you for being with us this evening, taking time from your schedule to be here.
Thank you very much, Father Phil. Brothers and sisters, I'm so delighted to be with you and to be at St. Catherine's Church. My presbytera is Catherine, so she's jealous. She's very jealous that I'm here. If I'm understanding what Father is asking me to do, I'm going to have tonight with you and hopefully tomorrow morning with you also. I'd like to divide it up into 3 segments, if I can. Tonight, I'd like to focus on what a husband is. Tomorrow, on what a wife is in the morning, first session. And then the last session on family and children and the sacred task of parenting. Does that sound decent? So I have to ask for the graciousness of the wives tonight, because I'm going to be speaking about husbands. So you have to be nice. The wives have to promise to be nice. And whenever I give this talk, I let them know that I'll be watching. No elbows, no flicks, no stepping on your husband's toes. And then I'll say the same thing, but this time I'll address the husbands tomorrow morning. Talk about what a wife is. This kind of retreat is not something that the church has always given. In fact, in the early centuries of the faith, there wasn't a lot of instruction that needed to be given by the fathers of the church on married life. Married life was very well understood, and we don't have a large collection of patristic texts on marriage. It's exactly not that way today. Exactly not that way. Today, we don't have any kind of common cultural understanding anymore about what marriage is and about what family life is. These days, when I have the privilege of talking to new converts, more often than not, they come from broken families, what we would call broken families, but what our culture would call normal families. Just one of many options that are presented in the American landscape of what life is like. And so the church is having to step up and speak much more concretely and in much greater detail with more support and encouragement about what it means to be married, what it means to have a family, how important children are, and how to stay together, basic virtues of family life that would have been nurtured intergenerationally and even culturally in times past, but today are not nurtured and sometimes even criticized or mocked. Some of our most precious virtues, like chastity or virginity, are not only not taught, but they are ridiculed and aren't considered serious at all. I remember in my parish, God bless those people, very patient people, very, very patient people. When I first went there, which was about 20 years ago, almost 21 years ago, I gave a homily. It was the feast day of the presentation of the Mother of God in the temple, when we celebrate her being dedicated and to the priests in the temple and entering the Holy of Holies when she was 3 years old. I gave a homily entitled The Glory of Virginity, in which I simply explained why virginity is so precious, why we praise the Virgin Mary for it, and praise her Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, for it, and praise John the Baptist for it, and praise so many who have, in fact, offered their chastity as a love gift, a free offering and love gift to God, and why the Church has always thought that that is not just a beautiful thing, but powerful, really powerful. And when I finished the homily, a lot of my ladies came up to me, my older ladies, and they were just crying at the coffee hour at the church, and they thanked me because they needed to hear it, evidently. It really impacted me. It was something that they were hearing nowhere else, absolutely nowhere else. And this is the case these days. The church is a beacon of light in a society that has turned off the lights with regards to marriage and family life and chastity as well. So it's a rather more dark place, which makes our teaching exceedingly important so that we can remain who we are and not be conformed. We're not supposed to be conformed to the world. We're supposed to conform the world to Christ. In Paul's language, he says this: do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you might prove what God's will is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. We are to be a change agent. We're to be well established in our life with God and able from a position of strength, fueled by a love for the world that our Savior loves. We're to be able to share our life with them and help people change and conform to the archetype of holiness, the archetype of truth and life. Sometimes, though, that's working in reverse. It's working in reverse if we're not well established. So all of that is just to lay a background for why conversations like these have to happen, why lectures like these should take place. We're on hard times, and marriage has fallen on terribly hard times. We have households in America that no longer have husbands and wives in them as the norm. When I was born, even though I'm a Californian, an Angelino, as my father is, and his father, since 1860, we've been living in Southern California, which is back in the crazy days. I mean, it's crazy now, but a different kind of crazy. Back in 1860 was the Wild West. All those Clint Eastwood movies were very much reality in mid-19th century Southern California, just some years after the discovery of gold. But when I was born, still in the mid-60s, 75%, 3/4 of all homes in the United States were occupied by a husband, a wife, and children. That's just how it was. Today, it's about 47%, which means that it's not normative. It is not the majority. It's not the norm. When I was born, adultery was illegal. Illegal. And if a man did it, it would be an alleged divorce. He would pay terribly for it in the settlement. Terribly for it in the settlement. Divorce was still very limited. When I was born, the majority of marriages that were contracted were of virgins. Today, the average number of sexual partners that a person has when they wed is 4.5. That's the average across the board for those who are choosing to marry. And many obviously are not even choosing to marry at all. Illegitimacy was 5%. Illegitimacy today is about 40%. 4 out of 10 children in America are born outside of marriage. In America's motherland, in England, that's over 70%. They're even further down the pipeline in the decay of marriage and family life. Abortion didn't exist as a legal right in the United States when I was born. And on we go. No one would have guessed, in fact, no one would have dreamed that there would be a time in which in Los Angeles, our school would be teaching children from the time that they enter public school in kindergarten, 5th grade, that they really can't know if they're boys and girls, that has to be something that's discerned, and that there are many, many different sexual identities that one can adopt that have absolutely nothing to do with biology. No one would have dreamed that. And if you had told someone, if you had told my parents that, you know, your grandkids are going to have to decide if they're boys and girls, they would have just looked at you like you're from another planet. What are you talking about? And yet to even say the things that I'm saying today in just these opening words could be considered terrible heresy. Terrible heresy in my state for sure, and in many other places. I'm not so sure about Phoenix. It's a little more sane here. I recently had correspondence with a woman who listens to a lot of patristic nectar publications, lectures from myself, the different preachers and teachers that are on that side, on the company side. And she was writing me a very nice letter. She wrote a very nice letter just to say thank you, that she had grown up in the chaos, which is secular life this day, and at 48 converted to Holy Orthodoxy, and really just found what we find in the church: peace and love and stability for her feet and a direction in life. And she had profited especially from some of the talks around the subject that I'm giving you tonight. And she wanted to let me know how much that had helped, even though she had never married and she had done everything else, in her words, the wrong way with regards to relationships with men. She was so happy finally to have this clear in her head about what marriage is. And she said, but I had this very strange interaction with some of my Orthodox women friends. And she said in her letter, she said, I actually shared your talks on the good husband and the good wife with a woman in my parish. And when I shared them with her, she yelled at me. And I told her, the woman writes, she goes, I asked her, why are you yelling at me? She goes, these are horrible talks from a horrible priest. And the woman said, and then I asked her, have you listened to them? And she said, no. But she said, just the title is offensive. I thought that was very illustrative. Very illustrative. Just the idea, just the title was enough to trigger her. The title, the good husband and the good wife. Maybe it could have been, I would have loved to have the conversation with myself. Like, what is it, sweetheart, exactly that's troubling you? Is it the idea that there's a good way? Or is it the idea that there's actually 2 lectures and not 1? That they're actually the same, right? Where this whole unisex drive of our culture, which, you know anything about the scriptures, the Old Testament has some really strong words to say about unisex life. Ouch. Very strong scriptural words against unisex. I would have loved to find out what really was the trigger there. But that wasn't even in the world. This was a faithful parishioner. This is in the center of the church. Whether we like it or not, this agenda, this catechesis of sexual chaos, what I would call sexual anarchy, is being driven on a global scale. And if we just go with the flow, if we just blow with where the winds are blowing, and we let the streams take us left or right, we will be formed. We will be conformed to an ideology that isn't blessed and doesn't produce holiness, it doesn't produce peace, it doesn't produce love, it produces misery, real misery. All that's background, just to tell you that I'm very glad you're here and are willing to listen. And I am not assuming because you're here that you are going to agree with everything that I say. I'm intending to share ideas about what God thinks about a good husband, and what God thinks about a good wife, and what God thinks about family life and parenting. And I'm going to try to document it heavily with Scripture and the Church Fathers, which are our authorities in the Orthodox Church. So at least then you would feel some weight, much more than just one priest's words. So tonight I'd like to speak about the good husband. At the very core of being a man, and of being a man in the position of being a husband, which is a great honor, it's a very special thing to have a woman choose you. It's very special. To have a woman say yes, and to mean it, and to allow herself to form a common life with you, and to pledge herself in fidelity to endure you. It's an incredible thing. Really, it's an incredible thing, and a super great honor. And to provide her a vision, to not assume that the idea about being a good husband is somehow innate in your DNA. That's a good place to start. Don't make the assumption that you're born with the conceptions built in of what it means to be a good husband. If that was the case, then the priest's job would be a lot easier. We'd all have this instinctually. We could just, feed you the right food and shake you around, and your DNA would line up, and boom, you would just become this incredible, loving, virtuous husband. But that's not how it works. It's not how it works. These things, like all of sacred tradition, like all of the life of God, these things are passed on organically. They're taught. St. Paul wrote to his spiritual son, St. Timothy. He says, the things you have learned from me, the things you have heard from me, the things you have seen in my life, these pass on to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. This is the path. This is how a good life gets passed on in the world. We get taught, we see a beautiful life, a life that's formed by Christ. We hear beautiful words, we witness it lived out, and then we sit at the feet of that person in an obvious or a non-obvious way. We learn from them, and then we try to do it, and then we pass it on generation to generation. This is how the baton of Holy Orthodoxy gets passed on. So we need to learn, we really need to learn what the Church has to say about the distinctives of what it means to be a good husband. I usually like to put them under 5 headings, but there's lots. We really could, if we had to, we could probably come up with 30 topics, 30 characteristics of a good husband. We could. But I'm kind of lumping them all together under 5 main topics. The first is that a good husband is a leader. He is a leader. Don't be scared by that, as though you have to be some special personality or something to be a good husband. No. By definition, the husband is a leader. Whether he has the personal characteristics to be a super great leader or not is irrelevant. The office itself, the office of being husband, is the office of leadership. So this is number 1. The second is that the good husband is what I like to call a domestic or a house pastor. Domestic or a house pastor. He has spiritual guidance to provide by virtue of being a husband. The third is that he is a lover. I'm always tempted to start there. It sounds the juiciest. The husband is to be a lover who brings the love of God into his own house. The fourth is that he is a provider. And the fifth is that the husband is a faithful and true friend. These are the qualities and the characteristics that I'm sticking all of those other characteristics under. These are the kind of umbrellas. So what I'd like to do is just spend a couple minutes on each. And I was told I have until we have from 6 to 8. So what I'm intending to do is go 6 to 7 of my doing this. And then we're going to stop, and then you can take it wherever you want it to go. Since you have that nice watch, would you mind telling me when it's 7? Just give me a note and I'll cease. Put this down?
It's 6:25.
6:25. Okay, thank you. So to be a leader presupposes vision. Leaders have to be able to take someone from point A to point B. To be a husband, you have to have a vision for what marriage is, for what family life is. You can't take someone to a desired destination if you're not yourself moving there and making an orientation there. If we're going somewhere, we should make sure that where we're going is actually good, that it actually pleases God, or we may end up being a blind leader like the Pharisees were. And Jesus said that the blind leading the blind ends with 2 people wounded in a pit, sitting in the bottom. St. John Chrysostom gives us a beautiful vision. He gives us a beautiful vision for life. The Golden Mouth, he says this. He says, life itself is a school of wrestling. Life itself is a wrestling school. It is a gymnasium. It is a battle. It is a smelting furnace and a dyer's house of virtue. These are his concepts of what living life is like. It's an arena. It's a place of combat for the soul. It's a kiln to make the image of God in us clear and radiant. Specifically, that spiritual arena has 3 major components for every marriage. Every Christian marriage is designed by God to effect 3 miracles, 3 beautiful miracles. The first is that it's designed to take our kind of disorders. We all have disorders, interior soul disorders, which are the most important to cure, and also exterior or physiological disorders. Marriage is designed by God to tame our wildness, to take our disorders and to bring health, to take disordered passions and to set them right, and thus to be of assistance on the path of salvation, what we call theosis or deification. Christian marriage brings all of our passions, not just sexual passions, all of our passions to the very surface of life so that we can face them, address them, cure them. Our vision sees the marriage of the husband and the wife as an extension of a relationship between God and his people, of God's interaction with every human soul. Marriage reflects that and is intimately tied up to it. So ultimately there are 2 marriages. There is an earthly marriage, which is what we're discussing tonight, but that earthly marriage can only be properly perceived and imitated if it's based upon the heavenly marriage, the marriage between God and the church. So that's number 1. This is the place where we work out our salvation, where our spiritual diseases are treated, in the stability of a faithful, indissoluble union, where mistakes can be made, apologies can be made, forgiveness can be granted, and opportunity for improvement exists day after day. Number 2, Christian marriage serves as the origin and the genesis for the procreation of children, which in the church's perspective is an incredible miracle. It is in fact not just something that's going on biologically, because a human being is not just biology. A human being is made up of a soul and a body. The best part of the human being is the soul, but the body is a part of a human being too. Together we have glory. So the reproduction of a child, bringing forth children, is in fact not just a biological process, it's a miracle of bringing an eternal person into existence. Reproducing the image of God which is something that parents participate in not just by having a child, but also by raising a child. Because the image of God is not perfect in our fallenness. We can't just have kids and say we're reproducing the image of God. That image of God is altered and it's darkened, and through proper parenting and discipline, both in ourselves and with our children, we recreate, we bring to refreshment the image of God which is in human beings. And number 3, Christian marriage fashions a one flesh unity on the earth that is a deep mystery. Chief witness to the unity between God and human beings. This means that authentic Christian marriage and the unity that's fashioned by God in a marriage actually communicates a mysterious relationship between God and people. People discern, who are not believers, people who haven't met God yet, and they don't know what it means to live in union with God, are to sense that, smell it, see it in a good Christian marriage. They should look at a husband and wife who are close, who really have worked hard to love each other and their children. They should look and go, what is that? That's from somewhere else. God must be there. This is the powerful evangelistic effect of good Christian marriages. And it's a mystery. It's a oneness of mind and a oneness of body. Not just in conjugal union, but also in a child. The one flesh union of husband and wife, which is effected with God's blessing in conjugal union, is permanently and eternally witnessed to in a child. A wife and a husband who love each other can look at their son or at their daughter and say, look, there's your ears. There's your nose, honey. How unfortunate. I've heard that from my wife plenty of times. And on, right? Because the child actually comes from the two. It's a mystery of union. The two, before they're married, are two. When they become married, they become one. And the fruit of marriage is that they become 3. It is an incredible movement of grace. Christian marriage provides a context for the forging of a unified, common life, a life of love that's stronger than the temptations and the crazy vicissitudes of life. It's how we're made to be together in a wilderness. We support each other. As Ecclesiastes says, right, 2 are better than 1. If one falls down, there's no helper to help the person up. Marriage is God's arrangement for us in the path of movement to the next life. A good husband grasps this. He has in his mind reasons that he got married, and they should be these. It shouldn't just be because I really like her and everybody's doing it. That's great, but what happens if people stop doing it and you don't like her anymore? You're toast. And that is exactly what's happening. People aren't doing it anymore, and people are sometimes not happy that they're married anymore. I tell people all the time when they talk about being in love, my youngest is 5. Mary Katherine. She's the best. She's the best. And she says incredible things that amaze me all the time. And one of the things she said to me recently, my 5-year-old, we were in the kitchen together, and she comes up and she taps my knee and she goes, Poppy, are you in love with Mommy? Are you in love with Mommy? And I looked at her and I said, today, yes. But then I thought about it, I'm like, wait, I should just say this morning, because frankly, I fall in and out of love with my wife on a daily basis. And for her, I'm sure it's on a minute-by-minute basis. She has a much harder task to stay in love with me than I do to stay in love with her. What a cute question. If we are only going to stay together if we're feeling in love, then we're going to have very short relationships. Very short relationships. C.S. Lewis, I love his incredible book, The 4 Loves. He says being in love is very important, but no marriage is based on it. Being in love is what convinces you to do the crazy thing you call marriage. He said it's the explosion that gets the train actually going down the track. And if you didn't have it, you would never commit yourself to this kind of incredibly deep and heavy investment in life. He goes, but what keeps the train running is self-sacrificial. Real love, deep friendship, philia, and ultimately Christian agape. Those kinds of loves are far more powerful in keeping Christian marriage going and deeply satisfying than the eros, which stirs us up initially, that we call being in love. So we should have a vision. A good husband, to be a leader, he should have a vision. He should know what it means to be a husband, what's different about being a husband than being a wife. He should unite his marriage and his vocation. This is a very important concept of leadership today, especially for those who are young. Maybe some of your friends, you mostly look to me like you're married people. But if are there any singles in here? Are there any singles? We're all going? Okay, so this is kind of for you. And through the married folks to the singles. But to be a leader and to understand marriage, you have to understand that marriage also has a lot to do with a vocation for a man. Adam was created by God before Eve was. Before he was given his wife, he was given his job. He had the job, and then God created the wife to collaborate, to fulfill him, to be what is called in the scriptures a helpmate. This is very important. To be a good husband, you have to have a sense of your vocation, what you're here to do. Men love to do things. That's what men love to do. And they get it done best when they have their partner in life, the love of their souls, their wife, next to them, teaching them how to do it. what spirit to have while doing it, right? But if you don't know what you want to do, how can you have a wife? This is why it's so nutty. So nutty for us just to ape the world's dating programs. And when our kids find out that a girl doesn't have cooties and he starts liking her, to have idiot parents think that that is the time to start dating. Complete catastrophe. Utter, total, complete. The time to start dating is when you have a sense of your calling. When you know what you want to do in life. You've grown up and you want to do this, and then you need a wife to be with you so that you can do this. And a wife needs to know that. How is a woman to make the decision to marry a man if that man has no idea who he is? He doesn't know where he's going. Can you imagine having this sprung on you? You fall in love, this is looking great, and then all of a sudden the man tells you, by the way, sweetie, I'm going to become a priest. Oh, I'm sorry, not every wife can be a presbyterian. I would say a very small percentage of women are capable of being presbyterians and are willing or happy to be presbyterians. Very small. Imagine he says to her, after they fall in love, oh, I've decided I'm going to be a military man. What percentage of women can actually stay at home away from their husband for 6 or 9 months at a time? This takes power, a certain kind of soul. So a good husband who's going to lead, he has to unite his vocation. He has to take it seriously. And this is one of the reasons it's very important for us to press and help nurture the maturity of our young people and to work hard for the abolition of adolescence. Adolescence, today we think of childhood, adolescence, adulthood. You know that's a very novel concept. History of the world, cultures all over the world didn't have a 3-step process. They had a 2-step process. You were either a child or you were an adult. And right now, as the fruit of extreme wealth in the West, we have elongated the maturation period such that you can go from 15 to 25 and there's not much difference. You're still studying, you're still living off people, you don't have any sense of providing for yourself and putting yourself in a position to provide for someone else. In California, we had a strange law case last year where a 30-year-old son was suing his parents for eviction from the family home. They just couldn't take it anymore. He was 30, still playing video games, still living at home, and they finally just couldn't take it anymore. And they kicked him out. So he sued them, trying to apply eviction law against his parents. Vocation. Husbands should lead in this. Husbands should lead in this. They should also take the leadership in the formation of marriage. So when courtship happens, a potential husband should have a vision of what that courtship is. When betrothal happens, he should have a vision for what that is. Should bring a strong understanding of marriage, should lead his wife to the church, to pre-marriage counseling. This is normal. This is normal. And then he should be committed as a leader to take what God has given him as a leader in the home and to cultivate it over time. This is very important. Marriage is a gift, and a wife is a crown from God. This is from the Proverbs. God gives husbands wives, and he works in his providence to arrange couples. But once he's given that, it's up to the couple and up to the leadership of the husband to make sure that that incredible gift that he's been given, that new plant, that it gets watered, that it gets weeded. If weeds grow in that soil, you got to pull them out. That it gets attended to. Far too many husbands treat their marriages like a cactus plant. There it is, doesn't need, doesn't need much, there it is. It's not how it works. It's not how it works. The soil is different for different marriages, but one thing that they have in common is that they need to be cultivated. They need to be nurtured, watered, trimmed, put in the sun, well cared for, if it's going to be fruitful. Or else it could be a withered up, homely looking plant, not producing much. Leaders cultivate their marriages over time. Initiating. A husband has to initiate. You have to cultivate peace. Especially he has to lead his wife in acts of love and friendship to keep together in harmony. I'm going to read you a quote from St. John Chrysostom's homilies on 1 Corinthians. It's very beautiful. He says this, he goes, "Let us do everything to maintain peace, absolute peace with our spouse. Because in this way, everything else will be peaceful, and we will sail with ease on the sea of life. Let us labor more in this than in the acquisition of houses or jobs, money or possessions, and a position in the government. Let our first concern be to avoid arguments and fights with our wife, who sits at the helm with us. Because in this way, other matters will turn out well, as we will have great ease in the spiritual life, since we will bear the familial yoke in harmony." Husbands have to lead in the cultivation of this, cultivation of peace, and be very careful when they've made a big mess, clean it up. And we're really good at making messes. We're often we come home scattered. We live public lives, most of us, and the world's a crazy place. And we come home and we can come home and spread anxiety, tension. And it's very important for us to develop harmony and concord. If you listen, next time you go to a wedding, next time you go to a crowning in the church, listen very carefully to the litanies. Multiple litanies are prayed for the couple. One of the most common things that the church prays for is concord, unity, peace. This is what we want. We ask for it from God, for the couple, and the couple is responsible for taking it and developing it. This is what it means to be a head. For the husband to be the head of the family, is to take leadership in these ways, to fulfill this vision of what it means to live together. For us, the notion of authority is about service. It's about doing the hard things first. Good husbands cultivate this over time. They assume full responsibility for their families, which doesn't mean that they take on a totality of the functions. That's not what full responsibility means. It means that they, as the leaders of their home, accept full responsibility for whatever goes on there. And they always put themselves forward as leaders to try to fix things. You don't just hide from them. That's called being a wimp. Hiding. We don't do that if we're good leaders, decent leaders. Sometimes this can be challenging, especially if our wives are more talented than us or maybe smarter than us. And I'm going to talk about that in the talk tomorrow about being a good wife. There is a way beautiful families know how, in fact, to hold together their unity and peace while respecting each other's talents and gifts and using them without offense. Okay. This is a little bit about being a leader. Now, I'm just going to spend a minute or two applying that concept to these other areas. What does it mean to be a leader in the spiritual realm? It means that you assume the role of domestic pastor. What that means is that you take an interest, not just in your own life with God, but in the life of with God that your wife has, and the life with God that your children have. And it's important to engage that, to develop it, to make sure that they are being nourished. And this means such basic things as that they are brought to church. It is not the wife's job to get all the kids to church. It's our job. Our job. The wife knows what she's doing, what her roles are, and we can certainly help her in doing that. But ultimately, the buck stops with us. And believe me, the children are going to develop an attitude towards being in God's presence and being near God from us. So if we're bothered, if we get up and we're bothered on Sunday to go to church, oh God, just give it up. There's nothing that you could say to your children about how important it is to go to church if they see you like on Sunday morning. If you're not happy to go to church, you got a problem. You're just not seeing it right. And that's going to pass on to your kids no matter what we say. If we fight on the way to church in the car, God forbid. But if we do, which is all too common, kids aren't going to want to go. If we're late, they're going to go, wait a minute. This is really that cheesy. This must be the cheesy place with the nice gold dome. You know, we wouldn't go late to a dinner party. We wouldn't go late to a movie. We're going to go late to the Holy Liturgy. We need to exercise leadership as spiritual guides, helpers in the family. And that means being clear about church. And by the way, all over the scriptures, we have these incredible examples of husbands who did this. The great patriarchs are a great place to start. Patriarch Noah, Patriarch Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Just think of Noah. Noah led in family worship his family all of the time. He built, when he got out of the altar, he built places of prayer for his family. Patriarch Abraham, kind of the prototype, I would say, in the Old Testament of a spiritual leader as a husband, led his family in family worship, made his home a domestic church, a place to pray to God. Everywhere he went, the scriptures say he built an altar and he, quote, called upon the name of the Lord. That's Genesis 12:7. He would move. God would tell him, go from here to here, starting in the Ur of the Chaldeans and then all the way to the Holy Land. He would tell him when to move. And each place he would move, the first thing he set up, the first thing was an altar. And led his family in worshiping the Lord, calling upon his name. I don't know about Phoenix, but in my state, we move every 3 years. That's the average, sadly. Which is really terrible, to uproot a tree and plant it and uproot a tree and plant it. You know why our monasteries love as vows stability. Our monks and nuns take vows of stability, because you need time to put roots down, for goodness sake, if you're going to grow high. But the reality is, with our job structure, that we move a lot. What does that mean? How can you imitate Abraham's example? It means wherever you're going to go. If you have to move a lot, put your church life in order immediately. Decide where you're going to go to church. Let the church be the first place you visit in your new town. First place. When you set up the furniture in your house, first thing to put in order is not the kitchen. It's the altar. The icon corner. Where are you going to pray? Where are you going to hang your icon? Where are you going to put your lamp? We're going to imitate the patriarchs, and we're going to be spiritual leaders in our home. We need to do that. Job, great prophet, much suffering prophet. In the early chapters of Job, after God describes him as this upright man, keeping the law and everything, blameless, it says that he used to get up early in the morning to make a sacrifice on behalf of each of his 10 children, because he thought possibly they might have done something to hurt their relationship with God. What a sensitive, husbandly, fatherly soul. Can you imagine a man who had so many distractions? He was the wealthiest man in the East. And yet he found time to pray for each one of his children and to talk to God about them. You know, when they're little, you talk to them about God. And when they hit about 15, that stops. And St. Porphyrio says, parents, we need to learn when their will explodes. When they're like 15, it's time to stop talking to them about God and to put all the effort into talking to God about them. And to continue to do that our whole lives. This is what the domestic pastor does. These are good encouragements for us. He can also be there for his wife and his children in times that are exceedingly important. This is like shocks, tragedies, sudden changes, big decisions, times of temptation. I had something happen in my house yesterday. We had some dear friends who live down the street from us. We've known them for 2 decades. Very close to them. They got a horrible, horrible phone call in the morning about their niece, who was 18 years old and a freshman in college, who hung herself. Can you imagine worse news for parents and aunt and uncle to receive than that? Just absolutely tragic. And of course, a tragedy that's literally exploding across our land. On average, a 23% increase in suicide from 1999 to 2014. In my age group of 45 to 64, it's gone up for men 43% and has gone up for women 63%. 63% higher suicide rate for women 45 to 63 between 1999 and 2014. We're really suffering badly. This disorientation and this disconnect from a life with God is really causing us pain. And when we got the call, we all know this family, we all know the people involved, and it was important for me as a husband just to sit with my family, to get everyone there, stop what you're doing, come into this room, let's sit together, let's talk, let's have a prayer. We have to do this. We have to do this. This is what it means to be spiritually responsible for families. And we all live through, every year, we live through a series of unexpected shocks and tragedies. This is just how life is. It bites. And it's very important for the husband to exercise his leadership as a person who cares for the souls of everyone in the house and wants to make sure they're okay, that everyone's okay. Spiritual leadership can sometimes be intimidating for us, but it's really much easier if we can just pop the bubble of fear that we have and just look at the concrete steps. We don't have to be great saints. We don't have to be great theologians. We don't. We just have to care, and we have to work to develop this in ourselves. Help have an order, a spiritual order to the house. We husbands know we're not great at talking, but we're usually pretty good at getting things done. And one of the things that we can get done is establish the regulation, what I would call the domestic typicon of a house. You guys know what a typicon is? You ever heard of the word typicon before? There's at the monastery out in the desert, which Todd and Nicolette took me to for like 59 minutes today. It was an extreme sacrifice over there. I wanted to go especially to the graves. I have a number of loved ones who are buried there, and I haven't ever been able to do trisagions for them. And I asked if we could just make it there, please. And so they drove me an hour and a half from the airport. And we had our 59 minutes, and they drove me back. But when I was there, I walked right by the typikaris of the monastery. A typikaris in a monastery is the one who orders the books at the chanter stands for the service. So he's the one who's like basically telling everybody, do this, do that, this next, sing that, don't sing that. Anyway, and he walks, sometimes you even see him in monasteries, they walk back and forth between the chanter stands. So if you have a left and a right choir, the right choir is singing the hymn that they're supposed to sing. And while they're finishing, the typikaris is walking to the other side, and he sings the first few words of the next hymn. So he'll just intone them. Let's say, praise the Lord, all you nations. Praise the Lord, all you nations. And then, boom, they start singing the beautiful praise the Lord, all you nations. Then he goes to this side. He runs the show. He runs the show. He keeps the typicon. Without a typicon, our beautiful Orthodox worship would be nothing. We would have no idea what to do. None of our churches would be in sync. We wouldn't know what to sing for Pascha, what to sing for Holy Week, what to sing on a Monday, what to sing on a Friday. It's all regulated. In about 50 books. It's no small task. When you become a chanter or a priest, a lot of your work is just figuring it out. Figuring it out. The house, which is a small church, in a tiny way, but an authentic way, also has to have a typical. You have to have a way you do things. When do you say evening prayers? If you don't know when you do, the chances that you're going to are small. You're going to have chaos, and you're going to have a much smaller chance of actually being as a family with God for some prayers. Whereas, if the husband can take charge of this, which is his role, as the spiritual leader of the house, he can say, talk with his wife and say, okay, sweetie, let's pray our evening prayers right after we eat. And the husband can just say, kids, let's go. It's time. Let's say our prayers. Say your evening prayer before you go to bed. A good husband does it. How much more time I have before 7?
5 minutes.
Okay, so in 5 minutes, I'm going to tell you about the juiciest subject of all. The husband as the lover. And so I see Father James Coles here, who with his reputation as the most romantic of all husbands and priests, should he come up here? Would you like to come and do this? Oh, Father. Oh, you're making me feel good. Making me feel good. If there's one thing a good husband is, it's someone who pursues his wife. And this is so manifest in what marriage is on the earth, right? St. Paul, when he describes the relationship between a wife and a husband, we read it in every marriage service from Ephesians 5. It lays out the tasks for husband and wife. And the wife is to obey her husband as the church obeys the Lord. And women hear that and they go, ah, scary. My very first wedding. The sponsor, the female sponsor for the bride, for her, she came up to me and she said, oh my gosh, Father Josiah just made, her name was Sherry, who was getting married, just made Sherry his slave. What? Anyway, she was not very familiar, evidently, with St. Paul and Ephesians chapter 5, and all she heard was, wife, obey your husband. And she said, in her mind, obedience equals slavery. Oops! That itself is worthy of a few homilies, since that is the most terrible thought in the universe. The worst person, brothers and sisters, possible, the worst slave master you could possibly obey is yourself. It's the last person in the world you ever want to obey, is yourself. Guaranteed to ruin your life if you put yourself first and you obey your own impulses. Horrible idea. Obedience is inescapable. The question is, who are you obeying? Are you obeying the Lord of life, who gives to his faithful servants every joy which can't be measured? Or are you obeying something debased, which will lead you down a bad road? Obedience is inescapable. And that's the easy part of the text. If you go on to the next part, if she had listened a little bit better, she would have heard the really hard words. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church and gave himself up for her. Husbands, wash your wives with the water of the word, that you might present them holy and without blame. What? Love your wives as you love your own bodies, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church. The call in that text between husband and wife, I'm sorry, there is no comparison. There is absolutely, if a husband has ears to hear, he's like a puddle on the ground, because he's actually supposed to be like Jesus. Jesus didn't take a thought for himself ever, literally ever. How many times have you read in the Gospels the Lord doing some incredible things, staying up, walking on water, feeding the 5,000, and then going up to the mountain to be with his Father to pray a little bit, not sleep, to pray a little bit. Even though one time he's getting a little tiny nap, and he puts his head down on the boat, and there's a storm, he has to wake right up because everyone's panicking. The apostles, we're going to die! Jesus, we're going to die! And he just shook his head, he said, you have little faith. And he looked at the waves and he said, please be quiet. I just wonder, if he meant, let me go back to sleep. And immediately it was quiet. It was so quiet, and they were all, ashamed of themselves. This is the Lord. Everything in his life is measured by what he did for us. Descending from above, bowing low to this earth, choosing to live here in absolute obscurity and anonymity for 30 years, and then pouring his life out for us. And that is the model for husbands. That's what we're being called to do. Jesus is the most passionate, thirsty lover in the universe. And he doesn't do what most men do. We men, when we're looking for a woman, we want someone who brings a lot to the table. Hopefully, literally, right? We want someone who can cook well. We want someone who's beautiful, someone who's kind, someone who doesn't talk too much, whatever. Jesus is exactly the opposite. Jesus went to the most sorrowful, filthy, ugly, and by uniting himself, by pursuing that, us, by pursuing us, by thirsting for us, by not taking no for an answer, he found us, he grabbed us, he joined us to himself, and in the union, in exactly the opposite way of what happens in our lives, a woman can bring her purity and a man his purity, and they take it from each other, they give it to each other as a gift. In the union with Christ and people like us, he actually gives purity. He takes someone who's defiled and makes them radiant in his union with them, and then keeps them in the palm of his hand. He actually has our names written. This is an Isaiah the prophet. Actually has our names written on his hands. And he says, would a nursing mother ever forget her nursing child? He says, no, but if she did, know this, I will never forget you. And this is the lover of souls that the husband is called to imitate. A good husband is a lover who is pursuing his wife all the time, despite whether she's responding the way that he wants her to. Sometimes we men get very frustrated because our wives, we initiate interaction, and sometimes we want to even be close to our wives and sleep with our wives, and we don't get the response that we. I can't tell you, if I had $1, or every time I heard that in confession, I would be a very, very wealthy priest. One of the things I say to the men, I say, look, do you really want? They'll say something like, Father, I just wish she would, initiate sometimes with me. And I look at them and I say, no, you don't. And they're like, no, I do. I'm like, no, you don't. That's what a man does. That's what a man is. You want your wife to be a man? It's not how it works. The allure, the beauty of being a woman is to be a responder to her man. And we have to pursue our wives and make sure that we adjust our lives such that the wife is pleased by our pursuit. And that could mean some alterations in our life, which if we're thirsty lovers and we really love our wives, should be willing to make. Should be willing to make them, to please her, and not to just please ourselves, because we're imitating Jesus, and that's how he lived. He formed his life to serve us. And we ought to do the same for our wives. So there you have it. Let's shift an hour of what could be 30 on how we men could really live the vision. If something is as important as marriage, that kind of investment pays off. Absolutely pays off. Marriage becomes the great blessing, the great source of stability in our life. I'm going to stop and open to questions. Don't be embarrassed.
The question about the life of the center. That's a very bad song.
Is that you, Father Andres? You are a good looking.
So I wanted to follow what you're saying. So for our married couples and son, how do you encourage them to help each other pray together? As a family or as a couple praying, what is normative? What is good? What is edifying? What is inspiring for them?
Fantastic question. Did y'all hear it? So, in answer to the question, what would I encourage? How do I encourage couples to pray together? What's encouraging? I'd make a few distinctions. So the first distinction to make is to remember, as important as you each are to each other, and as fundamental as your marriage is in your life, it's a second relationship, and it's a second marriage. You have a first one that's primary, and that is your relationship with God, which is not through each other, it's with God himself, lived in the church. So I would say, remember that your spiritual life together can't just be a corporate spiritual life. You have to have a life of your own with God. And that is goes as far as even your own confessional life. Couples don't confess together. That's not our practice. They have their own sins that they're working with. They have their own spiritual life. They have their own relationship with their spiritual father. Sometimes you can deal with a spiritual father as a couple, certainly. But you have a fundamental one-on-one relationship with someone that you trust like that. You know, in the last book of the New Testament, the Apocalypse, which was a revelation given by Jesus from heaven to John, his beloved disciple, when John was an old man. John had already lived an incredible life. He had converted so many people to the Lord and proclaimed the resurrection all over the world. He had been, numerous attempts on his life had been made that were unsuccessful. Finally, he was confined to the island of Patmos because the emperor couldn't kill him. And he thought he was a god, that he was a demigod, and that he just gave up. So he tried to limit his influence by keeping on the island of Patmos. And it sets the stage for the most incredible revelation that Jesus comes to him and gives him 7 letters. He dictates 7 letters to him. And those letters were to concrete churches in the environs in Asia Minor, which is a powerhouse, very much like Cappadocia in Turkey, a powerhouse for Christianity at the end of the 1st century. And it was probably also a preaching circuit, an apostolic preaching circuit, these 7 churches. And in one of the churches there was a coastal city, very wealthy, very successful church, the city of Ephesus. It's a pilgrimage site for us today, but not really a functioning church like it used to be. But it used to be a huge functioning, very influential church. You're probably familiar with it from the fact that the whole letter is called the Ephesians in the New Testament that St. Paul wrote to that area. It was a general epistle that kind of went there and around. To that church, Jesus dictated these incredible words. In all 7 letters, he uses the same form. He'll say something about himself. Then he'll let them know he's watching them. And then he'll tell them anything good that they're doing. That's where he starts. I'm so thankful that you're doing this and doing that and doing this. And then if there's something that needs correction, he'll say what the criticism is. But I notice you're doing this. And then he'll make a promise. If you do what I'm saying, he'll give a counsel like, this is how you fix it. And then he'll make a promise. If you do this, trust me, it's going to go good for you. And this is what's going to happen. And then he always ends with a threat. But if you don't listen to me, I'm blowing out your candlestick. The candlesticks appeared in the 1st chapter of the book, and they represented the churches. Each church has a candlestick. And anyway, as a side note, we Orthodox do not believe that there is any promise to any piece of geography or any national church or any patriarch that they will always exist. The Lord honors our freedom. And there are whole sections of the world that used to have thriving churches, massive thriving churches, and today there's nothing there. And there's also sections of the world that had no church, and in the last 200 years, now there's a thriving church. God honors our freedom. God honors our freedom, and he guards vigilantly the purity of his church, and he'll prosper church communities that are faithful, and he'll blow the candlesticks out of those that aren't, and they will literally disappear. We are not Catholics. We don't believe that there's any special promise to a city like Rome that somehow forever, forever, and ever, and ever, and ever. That's complete nonsense. Complete nonsense. Anyway, side note. Don't ask me why that's a side note, but it has relevance to things that are going on in the church. Anyway, so here's what Jesus says to the church of Ephesus. He said, you've done this and that good, and I'm so thankful. You know, you've tried those that claim to be apostles and aren't. You've tested for true doctrine and false doctrine. But I have one thing against you. You have left your first love. Therefore, repent and do the deeds that you did at first. It's a beautiful counsel. They had taken Jesus' supremacy in their life, which is the very definition of what it means to be a Christian. Jesus is supreme in all areas of your life. Period. That is what it means to be a Christian. They had taken it and they had demoted Jesus. Oh Lord, you know, I love you, you're really wonderful, I honor you, I know you're the Lord, but you're number two. He doesn't say who took the first spot, but in a lot of marriages, that's the temptation. The earthly spouse can become number one. And sometimes that relationship, in order to keep it, we even do things that don't please our real number one spouse, which is the Lord, which we should never do. If a husband or a wife asks the other to do something immoral, on principle, we should say, sweetheart, why would you ask me that? No way. No way. Jesus first, you second, sweetheart. Period. Or else the same interdiction will come against us. So I would say, with regards to prayer, we have to remember that. Don't just pray together. No. You have your own prayer life. And what's normative, there is no such thing as what's normative, I don't think. Any more than every person has a different canona for themselves that they have to fashion, that fits your life. And it has to be the case with husband and wife too. There are times when the wife can pray and the husband can't pray, times when the husband can pray and the wife can't pray. And they should have that, and they should hold themselves accountable to their confessor for that. And then they should agree on what they're going to do together. Some obvious things to do together is when you eat together, you pray together. If you get up in the mornings at different times, that can be difficult. But certainly at night, you should try to always say your evening prayers together. And to share each other and not to invade each other's space. Whatever one feels comfortable with, that's what they should do. What the other one feels comfortable with, that's what they should do, with a deep mutual respect for each other in going before God. And if we ever want our spouse to do something different in their spiritual life, we should always ask permission to talk about it. It shouldn't just be something that we just say. It's always better like this to say, hey, sweetheart, can I talk to you about something I was thinking about? And then he or she will say, sure, honey. That's a whole different conversation than just coming and saying, sweetheart, sit down, I have to tell you something. Those are two totally different things. I relate it like this. This is especially good for the wife to get. Because we husbands, we have a hard time receiving that kind of penetrating questioning. I have a bishop. Father Phil has a bishop. The other priests here have a bishop. That relationship is a very important one and a very sensitive one. And being a bishop doesn't mean you're right. There's nothing about being a bishop that guarantees you that you're right. You can actually be wrong in a conversation that you're having. I'm not like saying heresy here, but it is true. It is true. And there's a way for a priest to talk with a bishop about something that he may be concerned about, the priest may be concerned about. What he shouldn't do is say, Your Grace, that's wrong. And if the priest says that, he's going to be in deep weeds. That's the facts. That's the facts. Believe me, I'm speaking from experience. One time, I was so frustrated at my bishop, and I threw my head back like this. I went, oh God. And he looked at me, he was sitting down, he looked at me, and he stood up and he said, God? And I was like, where is the rock that I can hide under at this moment? Anyway, the conversation was over. Anything I was hoping to accomplish completely trounced by my total stupidity and my wrong approach. I was a brand new priest, didn't know what the heck I was doing. But I learned it's much better like this. Your Grace, may I have your blessing to speak frankly about something? Wow! If he says yes, the green light is on to proceed. If he says no, it's respected. And I can circle around and visit it another time. But those approaches are radically different, and they often have a radically different end. And when we're talking about spiritual life, which is the most sensitive thing with each other, we should be really careful not to step on each other's feet. And especially if we get a great idea of how we want it to happen together, we should make sure that we're doing it, we're fashioning it collaboratively. And collaboration always means compromise, which means no one party is doing it exactly the way that they want, unless the way they want is exactly in accord with each other. So establishing some beautiful way that's reasonable to pray, and I would say this, shorter is better if longer doesn't get done. So there's a prayer rule, a prayer discipline in the house is only as good as it is accomplished. A prayer rule, a kanona, is not a prayer hope. A prayer rule is the minimum that you're going to do in your life every day in such a way that if you miss, you would rather have toothpicks stuck in your eyeballs than miss. That's a prayer rule. And that's how we should keep it. No matter what, we do it. We don't eat breakfast if we haven't done it. We don't do anything that's not essential if we haven't done it. And that is really good. You can, of course, always do more than that, but not less. So husbands and wives in their what they want to establish as their basic discipline, they want to have evening prayers, for instance. They should build in their lives on that. They should start simple, share prayers, and build on the discipline. And don't just bite something off that they can't actually fulfill. And if there's kids involved, it's very, very important to include kids in the living prayer of a family. In my life, for many, many years, probably 20 years, probably for the last 20 years, I don't say anything in family prayers. And I'm a priest, like nothing. I'll start it, I'll make a cross through the prayers of our Holy Fathers, and then poof, this one says that, or this one says that. Even the little one, even my little one, as soon as they can stand and speak anything, they get a part. It could just be a simple Kyrie eleison, maybe a threefold Kyrie eleison, maybe a 12-fold Kyrie eleison. Something that's simple. And then the bigger ones have the more complex parts. Usually it goes, they learn how to say the Lord have mercies, and then they might learn how to say the Our Father. And when they can do the Our Father, wow, that's big. My little 5-year-old right now does the Our Father as her prayer. And she keeps it. She keeps it. If I'm making her breakfast in the morning, which I often do, and she comes to the table and she hasn't actually said, I saw that she came downstairs and she just walked right to the kitchen, I'll pour the cereal and then I'll just lean over and I'll say, And she'll look up at me and I'll say, Our Father. She'll jump off her chair and she'll run over and do her rule. And it's fun to tease her, but she's learning a very important lesson. No breakfast if you haven't said your prayer. Please.
I have two questions. Sure. Just to be brief on it. I came back to the church very much. Decided that I needed prayer. We found those other sermons with my relationship with God, it sort of started going. I've heard the priests say that my relationship with God should be number one and my wife should be number two. How do you do that? I don't understand.
Sure, that's a great question. Can I answer that before you go on to the please? The question is, if you're trying to put your relationship with God number one, and your wife number two? How do you actually practically do that? And I would say there's a few measurements you can use. The first is you establish as non-negotiable the elements of a relationship with God that are basic. And what I mean by that is you made a commitment with God, for instance, to be a faithful worshiper. Period. Whether someone wants to come with you, your wife wants to come with you, your children want to come with you, if they don't, that's not going to change the fact that you are going to go into God's house, draw near to Him, and participate in the Holy Liturgy, in worship. So establishing yourself as a faithful worshiper, keeping a close look on your soul, finding someone to be your father confessor that you're accountable to. This is why God gives us priests. He gives us priests to shepherd the flock, and to establish a normal relationship is a tremendous power in a person's life. To have a good relationship with your confessor and with your pastor. Sometimes those are the same person, sometimes they're not. And that is your thing. Keeping your prayer discipline. Reading the scriptures in a faithful way so that you can hear God's voice. These are non-negotiables that even if anyone isn't next to you doing them, they should be done. And they're absolutely important for you to cultivate that as a basic connection with God and to live with God. But whatever you do, whatever you find your hand to do, your work, your life as a husband, as a neighbor, whatever you're involved with, to try to do it not for yourself, but for Him. Paul puts it this way, he goes, whatever you do, even the little things, even eating, even drinking, do it all to the glory of God and in Jesus' name. That simply expresses the right relationship between a person and God. Then you can flesh out your most important earthly relationship within that context. So then you're bringing your wife and your children into who you are with God. You don't have to say much about it. This is who my husband is. This is who Dad is. He's a faithful churchman. He wouldn't be caught dead not praying. He tries to keep the commandments, and I know he's trying to serve God in His work.
Thank you. My second question is more practical. We're discussing the role of the husband in marriage. My role as a husband. My friends know this, but I'm going to spot because you tell me. Sometimes I'm worried because things I may want to say in conversation with people else. Should I do that myself, or should I do however?
Wonderful question. How much should a husband tell the wife? How much should a husband tell the wife? I would say he needs to tell her everything she needs to know. And the follow-up question is, what does she need to know? She needs to know all that would be important for her, all that would be good for her. Does that mean everything? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If you told your wife everything, you are presupposing that you are both designed to bear everything in the same way. And that's just not true. I'll use myself as an example, and I think this is true for all priests. There is no priest in the universe who tells his wife everything. It's a matter of, on principle, there is a massive part of a priest's life he's resolved to tell no one, literally no one, because that's the only way to create space for healing with people, to infuse people who are his sheep with trust. If people hear ever that their priest has shared something outside of their sanctified pastoral relationship, that's the end of pastoral relationship. That is nuclear war. I've seen whole churches decimated by a priest not keeping his mouth shut. I mean, literally an entire parish decimated, gone, like split. So there are many things that may not be good to share, especially with what you see. We don't have to always pass on hideousness. We really don't. We should cover over most sins with a blanket. That's what love does. We should try not even to meditate too much on the bad things we see ourselves. It can just destroy us. Instead, we should do what St. Paul says. Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is lovely, whatever is beautiful, think on these things, and the God of peace will be with you. So in general, we have to choose to meditate upon the beautiful and the good, and intentionally say those things. And good husbands do that. Good husbands know words are power. Words alter people's lives. They can tear a person to pieces. The wrong words said in frustration by a husband to a wife can cause wounds that exist for years. Instead, he should remember what St. Paul says. He says, let no unwholesome word come out of your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification, which means building up, according to the need of the moment, that you might give grace to those who hear you. Wow! Can you imagine? Part of being in the image of God is that we can speak a logos too. God has his logos, but we also have a human one that we can speak that can actually give order to life. It can actually bring hope. It can bring encouragement, and that is what a husband should work hard on doing, is choosing to share with his wife what he feels is the best to help her, to nourish her. I'm not suggesting that there's large areas of your life you shouldn't share. In general, close relationships are very intimate, and a lot of communication exists in good marriages. Good marriages work hard at talking and listening. That's just what good marriages do. But things that have hurt you, a lot of times as husbands, we want to run, our wives are such comforts to us that we want to run to them for comfort. And we often repeat things that are they're so sad. And what they end up doing is just spreading the misery. A lot of times we should just bury it in prayer, bury it in love, and choose to meditate on the good.
So the first we have is, so I came from a single parent home with just another generation, early 20s, yes, were also we learned respect a husband and men who did grow up strong father figures. Not being malicious in this way, but just looking at their leadership, because I was really very strong hands and leading my cousins and my other leaders, like a doctor, and so you don't really fit in, because he's grown up like a 21st century honest and Steve you know, how probably but I was probably to find, so I probably
A wonderful question, and thank you for asking it. I think that your background is more and more common, and so this is an important question, not just for yourself, but for many, I think. How do you live out a normal mutuality of marital roles when it's really just on paper? You're just seeing it on paper, and you haven't actually seen it, this beautiful complementarity, which we believe so deeply in, which our culture doesn't believe in at all. How do you actually fashion it? I would just say one of the ways that you do it is exactly what you're doing now, which is you study it intensely. You study it intensely because you can't actually put into practice what you don't conceive. So pose all the questions, try to work out answers, imagine scenarios, talk through it even with a beloved or with a spouse. Talk through it and give each other space to be imperfect. We bring some good things, and all of us bring our pathologies from our youth. also into the relationship, and to know each other's weaknesses and to try not to stoke those into existence is very helpful. So study it intensely, and then practice. And that means, of course, when you don't have great models that have kind of just been infused into you, it means that you have to learn how to make mistakes and offer easy forgiveness to each other. If you're going to fashion what you conceive of as beautiful, but you don't have just the natural disposition to it because you weren't formed that way, it's going to take, you're going to have some wobbles, maybe a lot of wobbles. And asking forgiveness of each other is very important. Good marriages often have on their lips, "Sweetheart, please forgive me. Please forgive me." And one of the ways that you can cultivate that is to imitate the practices of our real spiritual warriors, our monks and nuns. Interestingly, in their communities, they end every day with an asking of forgiveness. So if you go to a monastery, a convent or Leo monastery, at the end of the last service, which is apoviknon is the service after dinner, just after dinner, little compliment. They'll read the little compliment, and then they'll go one by one, and they'll come up to each other and they'll say, "Forgive me, a sinner," and they exchange forgiveness. Super beautiful. The abbot, the leader, starts. This is a good example for the husband. So one of the things that I've done in my family life over these last 30 years is that at the end of evening prayers, even if evening prayers are short, we line up, and then I'll stand first, and my wife will come to me, and I'll say, "Forgive me, a sinner." She'll say, "Forgive me, a sinner." We give each other a kiss. And then she stands right next to me. And then the next oldest child will come. And everyone will ask forgiveness of and give a kiss to everyone else. Of course, it's not like, what should I say, monastic precision. There's a lot of kicking and tweaking and pinching, and I'm sorry, I've never been able to get that out, but it still exists. But it's a beautiful, beautiful thing, and it really has helped form in us an ability when we offend each other. And what family doesn't offend each other all the time? It's really formed an ability to quickly apologize and to know how to do it. I say this, they say that, we kiss, and we're all right.
So also learning how being a partner or wife in today's modern life to be more traditional theoretically, which also means that a husband, because husbands still live in the modern society, roles are
Yes.
continuing to learn how to be a good wife when you aren't able to stay home. I work for the SME in a healthcare position. I'm supposed to do a lot of sparing behavior, just kind of that sort of thing. Even not to get back home to your husband when you're out of kind of that church and peaceful life every day. And also doing that without prejudice, and the only mostly is a monster family. So being able to go what I would consider just to be a Orthodox person, which to be is possibly seems weird in that.
Well, if I understand your question right, the question is at its base, how do we strive for what's the ideal, what's the norm in the church, and at the same time living in circumstances that aren't that, and wanting that, but not always being able to make great strides to get there. This is very much our condition today, and so I learned something pastorally when I was first ordained. I've always been very interested in marriage, very interested in human sexuality, and I actually did my doctoral dissertation on these subjects. And I once wrote an article for a journal on that they wanted an overview, like a 6 or 7 page overview of sexuality. Like, what is the church's view of it? And what are its real purposes? What does it engender? How should it be pursued? And what aspects of deformed or kind of pathological sexuality should be avoided? And I wrote the article, and it was an academic article in a journal. And I received this very strange email of someone who had read it and was deeply, deeply offended by it, and sent me this email saying, where is the gospel in this? Where is the grace of God in this? And I wrote the person back, and I said, forgive me, I said, this was an article in which I was asked to cover just one subject, and that's all it is a factual article. I said, the grace of God is above it, below it, through it, left and right. I said, please don't misunderstand this. I'm laying out the ideal. I think this person felt so wounded and discovered so many aspects of his life that were kind of not blessed. And we're very messed up in this area, right? We literally are living in an epidemic of pornography addiction that has warped our souls. It's the Black Death spiritually. But he had a hard time just looking at the ideal, because he was condemning himself so harshly. And I told him, I said, brother, please don't do that. He wouldn't sign it was an email interaction, he wouldn't sign it. And he sent me back on some other email. I was able to find it. It was actually a friend from my first year in college that I hadn't spoken to in forever. So I was able, in my last email, to write it back my name. I'm sure that kind of shocked him. But it brought warmth kind of back to the interaction, because we actually knew each other. And it takes a lot of, you have to know the love of God for you, and to really feel the cross, and never look at the standard that God sets except through the cross of Jesus. You have to remember what you are to Him, in order then to look at what your goals are without feeling bad. Because He doesn't set forth the goals, and He doesn't preach the goals to make you feel bad. He wants to bring you to this place of health, this place of normalcy. And He is exceedingly patient, way more patient than we are, in helping us get there. So if you have this, you find yourself in this circumstance, you have the entire church with you, basically, in different avenues. We're all, in some way, very far from the ideal. And we're setting our minds upon it, because setting our minds upon it is the first and most important step to start making a movement towards it. St. Paul addresses this in the 1 Corinthian letter very much, because there were marriages in that church that were mixed, and not just mixed like we have mixed marriages today, but mixed really radically pagan and Christian. And the spouses really had no idea what to do. And Paul, very wisely, as a master pastor, said, look, no pressure, no force. If your spouse, your pagan spouse, wants to remain with you, absolutely let them remain. And if they don't, let them go. You're not under bondage. Is a very beautiful word, and I think has the flavor of how we want to pursue God in general, which is with a lot of freedom, always trying to get to the next step, bring through it. So, for instance, how do you go from a culture in which the foundations of the culture, the unisex drive, the complete obliteration of the very things we're talking about, the idea itself that there are sex roles, these things undergirded traditional society of every religion for most of the human race, most of humanity. When the church fathers write, they describe the public square as the realm where men live, and the domestic management of the domestic sphere as the wife's role. And so their whole view of how to deal with that is so contrary post-feminist West. It's very hard to bridge the gap. Very hard to bridge the gap. Sometimes when I have a series that I do on the Virgin Mary's life, and I've had a number of times when I've given that lecture series on the life of the Virgin Mary, and I've had women come to me and say, don't give me the Virgin Mary as a model. It's too big a gap. I can't do that. And And I have to sit with them. I say, look, there's no alternative. If the gap is that big, it's because that's how far we are away from sanity. That's how far we are away. And so we can't give up on it. We can't say, I don't want to look at the Virgin Mary as the model of what it means to be a woman. And remember, the Virgin Mary is the most influential woman in the history of the human race. More known and talked about than anyone. And she never received a paycheck in her life. She was a mother. The church actually believes motherhood is the most important job in the universe. The church actually thinks every other job exists to support that. Talk about a radical idea. Motherhood, there is no job more despised in our culture than motherhood. The feminists want you to think if you actually are raising children, you don't have a job. Oh, you don't work? Huh? I don't work? Raising eternal beings forever? Making the souls of people who are going to do the most important things in life. So we are really, really far apart. And when we find ourselves, when we learn things, I would just say we should pray through all of our perceptions. Thank God for showing you things. Ask Him what you just asked me. Lord, what should I do with this? What do you want me to do with this? I have these responsibilities. I've been trained this way. I have this career. If you have children also, I have these children. Lord, help me discern what are your priorities and how I can make the steps to get there. No force, no pressure, prayerfully. Consult with the person you trust, consult with your spiritual father or with your confessor, and think of ways, we should all be doing this, ways that we can make steps towards the idea, towards what's been revealed. Does that make sense?
I have a question. Okay, so we've been to one of your past sessions, and one of the things you did was just framing the reveals to the family. And that went well, except there was one part that was kind of difficult to reconcile, right? You have a bunch of atheists, Muslim, blah, blah, blah. So how do you exactly go about enforcing, well, not enforcing, but celebrating the Christian times, giving you during mealtime or whatever? Because right now you've basically gone down to that, right? Is that the proper way, or is it, what is the proper way of continuing on that? Because it's the pressure I'm seeing from my family, especially from my kids, and I'm sure you're going to talk this more, from middle school, grade school, all the way to high school. The pressure to just remove the gender differences and celebrate, even at work, right? Where they're saying, oh yeah, you should go out and self-identify yourself. It's just maddening. It's now at the point where it's the clothes off, where I can't even tell my kids, well, yeah, it's okay to keep praying in front of your things like whatever, friends who don't believe in any of this, right? And without putting them down, but at the same time, I want to make sure we still retain that.
There's a lot to those comments, and a lot of avenues that can go down. If you allow me, I'll make just a few comments about what it means to live today in the most religiously and ethnically diverse nation in the history of the human race, because that is what the United States of America has become. We are the most religiously and ethnically diverse place ever. And we find ourselves often without a commonality of presuppositions about who God is and what it means to be a person, even what it means to be a man or a woman. If we allow ourselves to celebrate diversity in the wrong way, we'll be ruined. We'll be absolutely ruined. Diversity on principle is not to be celebrated, unless it's a good diversity. And this is the distinction that we haven't been making. We don't, for instance, celebrate moral diversity. He loves his wife, he's a wife beater, they're diverse. Yeah, we celebrate diversity. We don't do that. We don't do that. So the idea that one of the presuppositions in our society about this, with regards to ethnic groups and religious groups, is that all religion is the same. Our forefathers are literally turning over in their graves. All the martyrs of the church are just turning over in their graves. All religion is not the same. We're being told this by politicians constantly. And this is why America has this deep political investment to read Islam as somehow Christian with a Muhammad instead of a Jesus. All religions are religions of peace. That's like a mantra. And it's coming even from the Pope. No, by the way, in the history of the Roman Catholic papacy, that is a highly ironic statement, since it was the popes who drove most of the crusades against Islam. Wow. Wow, I really don't think so. Which one of you are infallible? Anyway, so there are religious diversity. It's not something on principle to be celebrated. There are many religions that the church fathers just think are very unfortunate. Are there good aspects of false religions? Yes. Most of the good aspects of Islam are the aspects that they stole from us directly. Their prostrations, their prayer 5 times a day, their fasting, all of that's from us. Muhammad learned that all from us. Their violence, their complete abuse of women. I'm sorry, these are not things to be celebrated. These are not legitimate religious options. They are not. And we will fight them always. We will fight these beliefs. So how do young people exist in a situation like that? If you go to school in Los Angeles, in the LA Unified School District, there are 198 languages spoken. 198 languages. That's that crazy. So I think in those cases, our youth must have very strong church communities. We have to invest in them. Very strong church communities, so that our relationship with the Lord can actually be what it's supposed to be, number one. If it becomes number two to their social groups at school, or it becomes number two to their sports teams or whatever, which is very easy to do, then their ability to hold on to the Lord is very, very small. I was telling Nicolette and Todd today an interaction I had with the superintendent of schools for the Riverside County School District where I live, who he's new, he's been with us a couple of years now, and when he became new, he wanted to meet me because we had some mutual friends. He's a Mormon guy, interestingly. And I went to meet him in his office, and he asked me, he goes, do you encourage your parishioners to come to our schools? I said, absolutely not. He said, what about your kids? I said, I have 10, right? He said, how many have come to my schools? I said, not one single day. And he looked at me and he goes, why? I said, really? I said, you're a Mormon. I know you are. I said, you send your kids to Mormon seminary 5 days a week for 1 hour before they go to morning class, don't you? He said, yeah. I said, you don't need to ask me why. I said, I'll give you one that was hurting me very badly at the time. I said, in every one of your junior high and senior high, you have a club that you call the Gay Straight Alliance that has one goal, and that is to mock religious opinions about homosexuality, to call us bigots, and to normalize and legitimize homosexuality as though somehow having a desire for the person sexually of the same sex is normal. All the fundamental texts of all major religions that say God fashioned man and woman separately with distinct sex to be complementary, your little clubs are saying are not only wrong, but bigoted. I said, and you know the consequence? The consequence is that I have lost a good number of my high school students. Literally. I've had at least 5 in the last 10 years conversations with high school students who are mature enough to entertain a request for me to sit down and talk about it, who informed me that it's clear to them that the church is wrong. and the church must be bigoted. And I've always asked them, have we ever shown any bigotry? Have you ever seen me ever be rude to any gay person? Of course, it was always no. They never saw anyone be wrong, but they were taught this, propagandized, literally brainwashed into thinking that religion is full of bigots and criticizers of people, and that they can't participate in that because of their gay friends. So, how are they going to survive that kind of thing? Not without a strong faith, not without a good connection to their church, which takes real commitment. It takes money, by the way, a lot of money. People go, one of the reasons people in my area have their kids in public schools is default, is because their taxes pay for it. They don't want to pay twice for school. And my state does not allow school choice. So you're not allowed to direct your tax money to private school or whatever. It only goes to the public school, and if you want to put your kid into private school, you're paying on top of your property taxes that go to schools as well. And that's what our people have to do. That's what our people have to do. Very difficult. If they're not themselves in a public spot or in a social, then who are they? They're just sand going through their own fingers. So I would say, look, we should help our young people to decide how do they want to pray when they eat. How do you want to pray, sweetheart? Just ask them. What do you want to do? And if they say, no, I want to give thanks to the Lord for it. I want to make my cross and say, Lord, please bless this food. I'm so thankful to have it. And then eat. I said, if that's what you want to do, don't let anyone or any social scenario turn you into something you're not. It's not you. Who cares who's there? Be you. If you can't be there, don't be there. But wherever you are, be you. And stay you. And that's a pretty good judge of whether you can be someplace. If you can't be you, and it's just too uncomfortable, leave. Don't go back. You got to be you. And it's better if you have strength, because other people, when they see God lovers like that, very attractive. So it's so nice to see someone who's the same, isn't it? To see someone who's the same all the time. You know, I probably shouldn't say this, but when I'm talking to my priest friends, one of the nice things these days is that, about being a priest, is that you don't have to be much of a person anymore to be pretty decent. I'm sorry to say it, but like in times past, to be a really great priest, I mean, you had to be like, wow, a man. You had to be a man. But today the culture is so crazy. If you could just like make sure you don't get divorced, generally love your wife, raise your kids. Honestly, your parishioners, they come to you and they're like, Father, I'm so thankful for you. I'm like, it's that crazy. It's that crazy. So in some sense, clubs like me, we can make it a little bit better because Sanders been so dropped. We have any more time? Is it 8 yet? Hope not.
Yeah.
Not yet.
8 minutes.
8 minutes, please.
First of all, thank you very much. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
So, as you know, I used to spend a lot of time with you. And one thing we talk about a lot is family, relationship, and husbands, so we have this is special time. One thing he really emphasizes quite a bit of time is that parenting is easy, but everything's going well. When everything's going wrong, you say everything's fine. However, we're parenting starts when things go sideways, when things that are bad, when children we're disobedient, do things that really make shame on you, to some degree. So, my question is, as the head of the household and husband, and you're leading your family in a certain direction, how do you be a strong backbone and dish out discipline, but still keep your children, I would say, on your side and still have the courage to come to you about issues without scaring you away and struggle?
Great question. Great question. And for those of you who are just listening, a lot of that question that Brandon just published there is going to be dealt with tomorrow, because we're going to talk about parenting extensively. And I would just say right up front that I have no idea. No idea, honestly. Parenting is so hard, way harder than I ever dreamed. And I think that's the way God makes it. Because if you knew how hard it was going to be, you would never do it. Forget about it. At the very base, when I think of my life as a dad, at the very base, what has helped me more than anything is to become convinced. And this is something I've had to grow in, and I feel still like I have a lot of growth to do. Be convinced that God is really with me and with my family and everybody else, and that He really wants me to learn to believe in Him no matter what. And like you're saying, of course, that's easy to do when things are going well. The challenging time is to believe in Him when things are going bad. But we're supposed to believe in Him all the time. That's the only way that we can actually have any personal experience of what St. James, Jesus' brother, said in the very first chapter of his epistle. He said, "Consider it to be all joy, brothers, when you encounter various trials." What? Consider it all joy when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect end, that you may become perfect, mature, and complete, lacking in nothing. And if any of you do lack wisdom, i.e. you have no idea what this terrible trial is trying to accomplish, let him ask of God, because God gives to everyone generously, and it will be shown to him. I'm telling you, that text, I've been trying to believe as a parent. Because I've never gone through the suffering I have as a parent. When the more you love, the more you suffer. The more you're willing to let someone else's life determine yours, the more vulnerable you are, which is God's will. Which is God's will for us to become like His Son. And I really believe that process, we look at it much different than Him. We look at it like, I'm the parent, you're the kid. I teach, you learn, and God looks at us and laughs at us. This is how I feel. He just laughs at us. And He says, you're kid number 1, you're kid number 2. You are a little bit older, kid number 1 than kid number 2, so I'm asking you, kid number 1, to take charge of trying to help kid number 2, but never forget, from my perspective, you're both kids. And I'm going to teach the littlest ones, hopefully through your love and effort. And I'm going to teach you through the pain. Trying to love them. I mean, I totally believe that. Parenting is about us as much as it is about the kids. And that, which is really hard to think and to actually believe. But if you think that, it puts a whole new face on what you have to do. It can certainly keep you from overreacting. Because you're always trying to figure things out with God. Like, Lord, I believe you. I believe you. What's going on here? What's going on here? The balance between firmness, which is absolutely necessary. And that has to be worked out between the husband and the wife too. Good marriages know how to do good cop, bad cop. Absolutely. Definitely needs to be figured out, right? And there's sometimes you even have to reverse roles. Depends. You have to be watching, figuring out what's going on here. This is why it's always good to find out what's going on before you act. Big mistake of early parenthood. Acting without getting the full story. You need to get the full story, no matter what. If a screaming kid comes to you, I'm bleeding. You just go, oh, terrible, terrible, terrible. Punish them, they say, punish them. He did it, give him. I will, just stay here. Then you have to go to criminal number 2. And without any preconceived notions at all, you have to say, hey, sweetheart, what happened? What happened? And then you have to listen to the whole other story. And then you have to back up a little bit and say, what is going on here? Right? Figure out what you actually believe. And then you can go and do your best job. And often you try to do the best. Forgive me, a lot of times it's a Hail Mary. Lord, I think this is what we're supposed to do here. I think this is best. And you try to be firm. You have to be firm. At the same time, you don't want to be too firm. Paul's very clear. He says, don't exasperate your kids. You can do this too much. You do this too much, they'll despise you. You'll have no rapport. You'll have no rapport. You do it too little, they'll become fools and embarrass you your whole life. So you have to be very careful. St. John Chrysostom, in his treatise on how to raise kids, he says, every father, this is good because we're finishing up about fathers. He says, every father should threaten the hand and use it enough only so that the kids know that it is possible that it's coming, but not so much that he exasperates them and they don't like it. So you have to know how to threaten it, and it has to be believable enough that they think, oh, it could happen, but not. And they stop. And then you don't want to do it too much that they don't like you. Then you lose. Anyway, more of that tomorrow. Thanks a lot. I appreciate all of you listening, and those of you who aren't going to be here tomorrow. Nice to meet you all tonight. Nice to meet you all tonight. God willing, we can pick up. I think it's early. Yeah, 8 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you, Father Phil.
I think everyone's invited next door for a small snack.
At this time, I want to rise for closing prayer, and all of you are invited. Okay, we're going to have some soup and some refreshments, so please join us. The Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Lord, please help the words that have been revealed and shared with us this evening in the context of this retreat. Help them to allow us to become the good parent, the loving husband, the loving wife. Please give us the grace and the ability, Lord, to be icons of you and to reveal your attributes in all that we do. We ask this in your name, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Please join us next door.
Hello there. Hi, God. Who's the king? Hello.